Hello and welcome to the Phu Cat Stories podcast. I'm your moderator, Saigon Steve. On this recorded podcast, we'll talk with service alumni who were stationed at Phu Cat Air Force Base in Vietnam and talk with them about their experiences. Today's podcast is pre-recorded, but you're invited to participate on future podcasts by emailing your contact information to phukatstories@gmail.com. That's phukatstories@gmail.com. So let's get started with today's Phu Cat guest. We're talking with Sam Creed, who was stationed at Phu Cat Air Force Base in Vietnam during 1968-69, same years I was there. How are you doing, Sam?
I'm doing very well. Good to talk to you today. Thanks.
Tell me about when you joined the Air Force. What year did you join?
Well, I graduated high school in 64, went off to work, and in 65, I got a notice to go get a military physical in Dallas, Texas, and they sent us back home and said they'll let us know. I went back for the second one. After the second one, I figured I better do something really quick. I didn't want to go to the Army. I wanted to go to the Air Force. I'd always heard that the Air Force would train you, so I went down to the recruiter I guess sometime in September of 1965 and was inducted in October of 1965 into the Air Force.
We started around the same time. I went in June of 64, Lackland Air Force Base. I had my birthday there. It was an unusual experience, spit shining your shoes on your birthday.
Well, I understand that, yeah. I was just 19 years old by October 65, which has always amazed me that the average age of the Vietnam veterans, 19-year-olds doing what we did. Can you imagine?
So when you left Lackland, did you go to tech school?
I did. Actually, the Security Police Tech School is in Lackland on the base, and then you go out to a place called Camp Bullis, which is an old World War II Army camp that's still there, as a matter of fact. You can still go out there. And I think it may still be used for training. But I went out there for security police training. They had a replica of a village in Vietnam set up out there, and they used that for training purposes, plus the rifle range. And I went through training there and finished up probably in January of 66, I think.
So what did you do between 66 and when you left for Phu Cat?
Well, in 66, they kept us at Lackland for a little while. There was an outbreak of some sort of problem that they kept us there. I think it was encephalitis or something to do that was fairly dangerous. Maybe it was meningitis. It was. And then we finally got pipelined to Little Rock Air Force Base. There were 7 of us that went. We called ourselves the Magnificent Seven. Went to the same squadron, 825th Security Police Squadron at Little Rock Air Force Base, which at that time was a strategic air command base with B-58 bombers, nuclear bombers. And from 66, for about a year, I was in flatline security guarding B-58 Hustlers that were loaded with 2 on any given day that were loaded with 5 nuclear bombs each, and the weapons storage area and the other security details that you had in those years. I had an opportunity. The first sergeant sent word down to guard me out one day that he needed someone to work in the orderly room that could type. And I had taken 2 years of typing in high school, and brother, I volunteered immediately for that. Went up. The first sergeant was pleased with me and gave me a job in the 825th Security Police orderly room, where I stayed until I left to go to Phu Cat. And during that time, I did the duties of a 702, which is admin clerk, but I still had the security police AFSC. And I worked in the orderly room with a great first sergeant who really kind of promoted me to do better things with my life.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about you volunteered because you could type. I was standing in formation one day, and they said, anyone here can type? And I raised my hand, and they said, good, you can tar the roof.
Yes, I fell for those as well, but in this case, it turned out to be a fortune. It was ideal. I worked in an oiler room with some great folks who really helped me through. In fact, sort of laid the foundation for my year or two of duty in Vietnam. I volunteered for Vietnam in February of 1968. My NCOIC in the orderly room was a guy named Jones, Robert Jones, I think, staff sergeant. And when my brother went to Vietnam, I got a letter from him and from my mom that he had been wounded, which really shook me up. And I was telling Sergeant Jones about it, and he said, well, what are you going to do about it? Something to that effect. And I said, well, I promised my mom that I would see what I could do. I knew there was something about two brothers didn't have to be in a war zone at the same time. Sergeant Jones knew about it. And he said, okay, let me get you the information. It was the Sullivan brothers. It wasn't a regulation. It was just kind of a understood thing, as I understand it. And a lot of brothers, in fact, were in Vietnam at the same time. I've since learned. Anyway, he looked it up and came back and said, okay, what you need to do is volunteer. When you get to Vietnam, you get to your brother and y'all complete the paperwork, and you can actually have him transferred out if you agree to stay for a tour of duty. And I did volunteer for Vietnam, was assigned to Phu Cat in April of 1968, right after my brother had been going through, his unit had been going through the Tet Offensive, and with a reporting date at Phu Cat on at about the 4th of July, 1968, I think.
It's almost like the movie Saving Private Ryan when you're doing the Sullivan brothers.
Well, that movie I can't watch. Yeah, it's real close. It's just real close. Yeah.
So let's get back to the first day that you arrived at Phu Cat. I ask everyone, what's it like when you get off the airplane on the flight line, and what's the first thing that runs through your mind?
It was kind of a long flight over. A guy from the supply squadron that became a friend of mine and I, from Little Rock, were actually on the same aircraft together with our squadron commander. So we had a little bit of a ride over and had to go to Hawaii because I think you probably remember the Seaboard World airline loaded with GIs was diverted to Russia because they apparently flew into Russian airspace. So we had to go to Hawaii. When we took off from Hawaii, apparently blew a tire, thought we were going to have to do an emergency crash landing at Clark Field in the Philippines, no problem, on to Cameron Bay. By the time we got to Cameron Bay, man, we were worn out. Called a C-130 up to Queen Yan and then a C-7 over to Phu Cat. And when we got off the aircraft, came down the back ramp of the Caribou at Phu Cat, you look around and you think, man, compared to Little Rock, which was a strategic air command base with supersonic bombers, this is a very small place. In a way, you kind of felt, okay, I can handle this. I'm not in this big, wide air base. Everything was just sort of together there. Well, you were there, you know how it was. And I went over to the base ops building where I think I must have caught a bus or something down to the orderly room to check in.
I remember very early when you got off the airplane, and I've talked to this with other people too, immediately they gave us the shot of the gamma globulin for hepatitis. And we all remember that. And that was probably in the first hour of being in Vietnam. So that was my initiation shot.
Well, they did that for us, but it wasn't right off. In fact, it was a little while later after I'd actually already started working. And the first sergeant sent out a list of our troops. We had about 40 or so air traffic controllers in our section. And, the punch cards? Mm-hmm. I gave the guys all their punch cards and told them to go get the shot. Well, they didn't and wouldn't. And finally, the medic set up in the chow hall, and you couldn't eat chow until you had your name marked off of off the list. So I noticed on several occasions I'd go to chow hall, and guys would come in. You'd have to drop your pants and get a gamma globulin hepatitis shot there before you could eat chow. Most of them held out. Some of them held out a couple of days, but finally they got so hungry they just had to go and do it. But I went over to the medic, and they were the Vietnamese nurse. In fact, gave me the injection.
So that's
Right.
that was it. The initiation for everybody who went to Phu Cat. That was the painful part, physically the painful part.
Yes.
So they assigned you to your barracks, and I also ask other people so they can get a feeling of where your barracks were in relation to theirs. Mine was across the street from the chapel. Where was your barracks?
Our barracks was new. In fact, they were still working on it a little bit when I got there and moved in. Some of the guys had started building the cubicles that we were able to build, but it was located immediately behind the chapel. Right there was a parking lot, there was a basketball goal, and eventually the Airman Club was to the left, back toward the chow hall, but the NCO Club was built just before I left in '69, which was just to the right. And then the post office built their center, I think, between the NCO Club and the chapel. It's hard to remember all. But anyway, it was immediately behind the chapel. But it was one of the newer ones. There were still lumber. Red Horse had worked on it, and we had bunks, but we didn't really have it organized a good deal until I'd been there for a little while.
So Sam Creed, you started out at the Air Force, security police, and then they switched you over to communications, right?
Well, what happened when I was in the orderly room, my first sergeant said, "Are you happy as a security policeman?" I said, "Absolutely not." And he said, "Well, cross-train." Well, I had heard that if you did, you wouldn't get rank and whatever. The first sergeant said, "No, that's not true. You want to cross-train into 702, which is administrative field." And I said, "Absolutely." So I went back to another Air Force tech school there at Little Rock, finished 702-5 level, and I had two FSCs, 77150 and 70250. And when I volunteered for Vietnam, personnel called me and said, "You need to come over here. We got to talk to you." And I did, and they said, "You're going to have to choose. Do you want to go to Vietnam as a security policeman, or you want to go as a 702? Well, I wanted to go as a 702 because we were getting guys back from Security Police Squadron in Vietnam. The 1041st Combat Security Police raided our squadron, and some of those guys were coming back. And I thought I better go as a 702, which is really my knack anyway. So I filled out the paperwork and was assigned to Phu Cat as the administrative clerk in the Flight Facilities Office in the 1883rd Com Squadron. That's where that office handles the RAPCON radar approach control, and the tower air traffic controllers. And it was the office for the tower chief and the RAPCON chief and the OIC and the other people that were in the operational level of air traffic control at Phu Cat. And I was their guy. I was their desk guy.
Well, nothing moves in the military unless it's typed out, right?
You got it. And I could, on an Olivet manual typewriter, I could do 60 words a minute. Yeah, that was a fortune that I could never have imagined when I was taking high school and typing, but it paid off. It paid off.
Your friends in high school, when you were taking typing and they were playing football, they're probably laughing at you, right?
Well, some of them did take typing, but I wasn't big enough to play football, but I was the manager of the team. I begged the coach to let me be the manager of the team, so I was with the guys and even got 2 letter jackets out of it. So I had a connection to football and sports, even though I didn't get to play. I just wasn't big enough.
So,
And in Texas, football is you got to be a hoss starting in junior high if you're going into high school football.
so what's a day like at the 1883rd Communication Squadron?
Well, it would start early with the controller shifts. They work 6 hours in the daytime, particularly during bad weather because of the high stress of combat takeoff and landings. And Phu Cat was a very, very busy air base at that time. Usually got the controllers to the tower and the RAPCON, and then went on to Flight Facilities Office where we handle all of the administrative work, details, problems, transcribed tapes of air, ATC incidents, did the travel that they needed me to do. But I sometimes flew to Da Nang with flight pattern changes, and then the Army came from Anke, where our office worked on air traffic control for the Army airfield there. It was just a busy day, typically, of ATC operational activities. And then there were some days that was just flat boring. We were working 12 hours a day, but it was just absolutely boring. And then it would get active, and it was, you sort of took it day by day for 365 days of tour duty.
I had a buddy of mine. He worked at Tan Son Nhut in the office with the China marker on the flight, the sorties and all like that. He said, I would see Phu Cat on the board, but nobody ever knew much about it. They also scheduled down there the missions for, I guess, the men up at Phu Cat to do.
Well, and actually the 1964th Com Group, it was located at Saigon. That was the group that the 1883rd was part of, and the ATC higher level activity came out of that unit in Saigon. Phu Cat was a unique base. It was fairly, by Vietnam standards, modern. I was at Da Nang and had to spend a couple of nights at Dog Patch. Man, that was the pits. I was down at Cameron Bay, had to stay in the Red Horse hooches, and it was so hot and sand filled the mattresses that was miserable. I went into Bong Son with the 173rd Air, where the 173rd Airborne was, to deliver some supplies and ammo and rations, just riding with the Caribou pilots. They came into the office and I'd ask them, can I ride with you? And man, the Army, I learned real quick that we had it pretty good at Phu Cat as far as living quarters and chow and that sort of thing.
Well, my buddy at Tan Son Nhut, he said the base was built around the Vietnam Village within the perimeter of the base, and I believe Da Nang was the same way.
Wow.
Rather than the Vietnamese living outside the perimeter, they're living inside the base.
Yeah, and Da Nang was one of the older bases, and the hooches, there were cockroaches big enough to carry you off in that. In fact, it got so bad that I went out to China Beach, where the Marines had a R&R, in-country R&R compound. Didn't have any room for me out there, but I slept under a juniper tree, which was a lot better than sleeping in those hooches. It was raining, and they were wet, and there were cockroaches in there. And I thought I'll do something about that. And fortunately, I had connections. I could just say ATC people and people that work with them have this unique connection. They've all worked with each other. And I could just say, hey, Sergeant Buchanan, I'm Sergeant Phillips from Phu Cat, sent me up here. And he'd say, oh, okay, what you need? And that worked real well for me as I traveled around for the squadron.
Speaking of traveling around, you mentioned something called the Coffee Pot Expedition. Tell us about that.
That was great. Our coffee pot quit working, and coffee is just an essential part of life. I mean, you've got to have it. And people would come in and get a cup of coffee. Our NCOs, the tower chief and the RAPCON chief and other people that came in and out, the coffee pot quit working. We went to the BX. They didn't have one. We decided that it would take too long to ride home. It would take a week or so to get a letter home, and then for somebody to get a package back. You never know what kind of shape it'd come back. So Sergeant Ron Phillips, who was a senior master RAPCON chief, said, "Creed, go to Quignon." The base ops NCOIC told me that the Quignon, the Army PX, has coffee pots. We'll get you a ride, and you go down and get us a new coffee pot. So I went back and got all the gear you had to have. I had flak vest and helmet and M16 and ammo, all of that sort of thing, loaded up. And the tower got me a ride on a Huey. The Army happened to be coming by, and they said, "Yeah, we'll come stop and get him." So I hitchhiked a ride to Quignon Army Airfield, walked over to the BX, and they had sold out. The guy told me, "We sold out this morning." So I'm standing there with the MPC in my pocket and no coffee pot to buy. So I walked back over to the Army Airfield. I moved some chow off the Army chow hall and kind of hung around for a little while and hoping I'd catch a 1:30 or something back to Phu Cat. Didn't happen. About dark, I thought, well, I need to do something. And I went up to the tower, in the Army tower, and I told them I was from Phu Cat RAPCON Tower Flight Facilities. And they said, oh, okay, yeah, we'll get you a ride if we can find somebody. They couldn't find anybody. So I just bunked out in the tower, fell asleep on the floor. And I don't know, about daylight the next morning, the Army controllers woke me up, and I could hear, sounded like mortar or something going off. They said, we've got incoming. We've got to get down to the bunker, which was down the stairs below the tower, sandbag bunker. And they had the PRCs. I forget it's the Army portable radio of some kind, I think. They took it down, and they were communicating with the pilots. And one of them turned to me and said, "Hey, you want to get out of here now?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I've got a Chinook pilot. He's on the tarmac. It's about 60 yards, and he wants to get off the ground because," and we were still getting incoming at a navigational unit called the TAC-IN, which was off the end of one runway. And I could hear a firefight going on, and RPGs. These controllers were telling me these various things, and they said, "We're afraid we're going to get incoming into the airfield. This Chinook crew wants to get off the ground." And he said, "If you can be there in just a few seconds, you can ride out with him." So I grabbed all my gear, threw it around my arm as best I could, and I went running down the tarmac as hard as I could run with all that. And he was his blades were already, on. He had the engines going and had the back ramp down of a Chinook. And the door gunner was standing there yelling at me, "Come on if you're coming." And I got to the ramp, and he started to roll. The door gunner kind of grabbed my arm, jerked me up into the bay of the Chinook. It was empty. And then he went on up and got his seat and did whatever. He looked like he jacked around into the automatic weapon he had out the window. But anyway, he told me to come up front and sit because there was armor plating up there beside him. And so we got in the air, and after a few minutes, the door gunner told me, "Okay, you can relax. We'll be at Phu Cat in about 45 minutes. So I got back to Phu Cat, walked in the office, and they said, "Where's the coffee pot?" And I said, "Okay, let me tell you my story." At first they didn't believe me. And I said, "No, there was no coffee pot." And I just ran away from a firefight at Quignon, and I didn't want to be caught in that. And I don't know where we ever got the coffee pot. I know we got one. I think maybe borrowed it from the fire station or something. I can't remember. But anyway, that's the coffee pot story. You got to have coffee.
Sure. And you used the word, you borrowed it from the fire department. That's a euphemism, right?
I was the radar of the 1883rd Flight Facilities. I scrounged stuff you wouldn't believe, including stakes for plywood that I got from Red Horse in return for a ride to Quignon to get the controllers to get a ride for a guy into Quignon on a Huey, I think it was, and he was able to get me several pieces of plywood that I traded to the chow hall cook so he could build a cubicle in his barrack for some steaks, and we had a cookout out beside the 1883rd Barracks.
So, Sam Creed, you were there in February of 1969, and we had a sapper attack during that time.
Yes.
What was your experience with that?
Well, that was the week that the IG from PACAF, I think it was PACAF, came in to inspect. I have kept notes over for whatever reason. I didn't keep a diary, but I just kept notes and photographs and written little notes. So I know it was in February of 1969. They were there probably the first or second week in February, around the early part of February at any rate. And my commander, my OIC, asked me if our office was in tip-top shape because he wanted a good IG inspection. It would be beneficial to him. Plus, I would get the benefit of it if we did well. So all week long, from Monday through Thursday, I worked from early morning until night. I got all of the administrative records, files, reports, everything that had to do with the air traffic control flight facilities office. I got them in shape and as they were supposed to be. And on Friday, they were coming, I think, the following Monday or the following Saturday. I think I did get a letter from of appreciation. It wasn't appreciation, but I got a letter of commendation from the IG. And the dates were February 7th through 11th. That was, I think the 7th was on a Thursday or Friday. But anyway, on that Friday, I just was so tired that I went to evening chow, and I came back to the ops building, and I sort of worked a little bit, and I thought, man, I'm just tired. If it's not ready now, if the IG doesn't like it, that's fine. What are they going to do, send me to Vietnam? I just walked on back to the barracks. And around 10 o'clock that night, some sappers got on base and fired RPGs into the buildings around us to one of the Caribou Squadron's building, the fire hall, and into base ops, and really tore things up and did some other damage. And our building, our office had a window in it, and if I had been there and had the light on, I always thought that, goodness, because I'd turned the light off and gone on to the barracks. If I'd had that light on, that would have been a perfect target for an RPG. There were some firemen actually hurt right next door to us because they had lights on in their building. That was scary. That was scary. I was glad that I decided to go back to the barracks and not stay at base ops that night.
My story about February 69 with the sapper attack, I was in the transportation squadron, and I got a call. There's a security police. He needs a ride out to wherever it was, probably out near you. And I drove him out there, and I pulled into where the area was, and my headlights caught all of these troops. They're all crouched down with their M16s, and I lit them up with my headlights. And so I turned off the headlights, and he got out of the truck, and I came back at probably 90 miles an hour to get away from there. Of course, the speed limit on the base is 25, but at nighttime, I bent the rules a little bit. And that's what I remember about the sapper attack at Phu Cat, February of 1969.
Yeah, I actually saw the bodies. I was going up to the tower. It was right in that area on the road that went up to the tower, and the bodies were still laying out on the side of the road, and the rocks and the security police were still there. In fact, I have a photo, not of the bodies. I never took a picture of bodies that I saw, when I was outside the base. And certainly I didn't take, because they were all mangled. But at any rate, I did see the bodies after all of that. The security police pretty well wasted them.
So, Sam Creed, let's lighten it up just a little bit. Let's go back to 1968 at Phu Cat, and you had something to do with a Christmas party with the orphans at the Phu Cat Village. Tell us about that.
Well, at Christmas of 1968, my OIC, Captain Robert Schultz, had a friend who was a chaplain at the base. His name was Theodore Wilson, Captain Theodore Wilson, and he came in one day and he said, "Hey, Sam, do you still have your gun card?" And because he knew I'd been in security, he had asked me about all these questions and knew I'd been in security police squadron. And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm still rated. I can check out an M16, and I still have a gun card. As a matter of fact, I had it from Little Rock. I'd kept up my rating all those years with the M16 and 38." And he said, "Well, I told Chaplain Wilson that, so he's interested if you'll ride shotgun with him out to the village, because he's trying to put together a Christmas party for the kids in an orphanage that was run by Vietnamese Catholic nuns and an Episcopal priest from Quy Nhon that was in Phu Cat Village." So I rode shotgun for Chaplain Wilson a couple of times to make arrangements for the Christmas party. And then finally, right around Christmas Day, the chaplain got a couple of buses. We had when you were in transportation, we had a transit system that ran regular routes.
That was one of my duties.
Okay. Well, apparently he was able to borrow a couple of those buses, and he asked me to ride shotgun with him. So I got all of my gear, and we headed on that particular day. We headed out to. This was the day before, I think, the Christmas party. Chaplain Wilson wanted to go out and make one more contact with the nuns to have all the kids ready. Well, we were headed down Highway 1 toward Phu Cat Village. Noticed that the ARVN checkpoint was not there. The ARVN troops were nowhere to be seen. We didn't see any rocks on the highway, any Korean soldiers on the highway. As we neared the village, Chaplain Wilson said, uh-oh, up in front of us. Well, first we passed some bodies, some VC bodies that the rocks apparently had killed earlier, which kind of spooked us a little bit. And he said, "There's a crowd of people up there, and I don't know what this is." So he stopped, and he said, "Get down in the well and go ahead and jack around and be ready. I don't think there's a problem, but I'm just going to blow through them." And we did. There was no problem. Went around it, went on down, went to the orphanage, turned around and came back. When we came back, the Korean, the rocks were there. Everything was calmed down. The next day, we went and picked up 82 kids. I remember the number, 82 kids, orphans. Brought them back to Phu Cat, to the picnic area. Do you remember the picnic area that was at Phu Cat? Had pavilions and a place to cook, and a number of guys. I have photos of a number of the controllers that cooked hamburgers and other kinds of food, and interacted with the children. They played games, soccer, races. 82 kids all afternoon long, and then they put on a program for us. They sang Christmas carols in Vietnamese, then had little signs that were actually in English. They weren't accurate, but I have pictures of them. They were appreciated. And we spent the afternoon. Well, when we finally got to the end of the day, the chaplain said, "Okay, we need to load these kids up and get them home, get them back to the orphanage." We did. And on the way back, they had eaten that rich American food, and they puked all over the bus. But the thing about it was, we kept noticing these kids had bags, and they had something in the bags. And one of our guys, one of our controllers, a staff sergeant, said, "This kid's come through 3 times. He can't be eating that much." We discovered they were getting the food and putting it in their bags. and they were taking it back to the orphanage. Food, I guess, is in short supply. So, and we gave them candy, so they had bags of food and candy. We took them back to the orphanage, and I still see guys. There were a lot of guys that post on the alumni page that talk about the picnic. That was Christmas of '68. They may have done it other times, but and I have some photos of the guys that I knew in the squadron, plus Jim Cooper, that he was in the maintenance part of communication squadron. He was at Little Rock with me, and we rode over to Vietnam together. But that was a good day, and I appreciate Chaplain Wilson. In fact, I think I got a letter of appreciation for my personnel file from that I still have. A little note that indicated that he appreciated, my helping, and it was great fun. And we also went out to the leprosarium, the leper colony, and I think we bought charcoal out there and took some food or MPC or money or something. I'm not even sure, but that was in '68, '69.
What a great story! Great story. In 1969, you went back to Vietnam. Tell us about that.
I did. I went with a group of guys, Vietnam veterans. We went in as tourists. We actually had a reason for going because we were looking for groups, Christian groups, that had been able to survive the communist takeover in '75. And basically, some of them had just had to lay low, and we were looking for them. But we started off in Hanoi, and I actually saw Ho Chi Minh briefly. I didn't want to, but the guys kept chiding me, so I went into the mausoleum where Ho Chi Minh is actually laid out under glass. And typical American, I had my hands in my pocket, and the Vietnamese guard told me to take my hands out of my pockets, and I looked at him and thought, okay, am I in trouble? And I just looked at him and said no, and walked out. Our leader of our group spoke fluent Vietnamese. He said, I think you're okay. You just disappear. Go on and go down and get on the bus. I did. But anyway, I did see him. And we looked around Hanoi and then went south to Da Nang. And then from there, a couple of other stops, Dalat, Bien Hoa, Long Bien, in the Saigon area, and then eventually into Saigon over in the Cholan. I saw a lot of things that I was teaching high school history at that time. I saw a lot of things and took a lot of pictures about the events that I was actually teaching the students about. So it proved to be a very beneficial, but we also found people, and there are some stories that I wish I could tell, but I get emotional when I do, of some folks that we found from some of our guys actually knew back in the late 60s when they were there. That was at Da Nang. It was a very powerful thing for me. I think it probably made a big difference for me. It was a healing time for me, and an experience that I'll never forget. And I would do it again. I would go back even now. Another time, there's a group going back next year that I'm not sure if I'd be able to make it. But anyway, I would go back.
I had a chance to go back. Another friend of mine, he was with the American Embassy in Hanoi. And he said, come on over, or you can stay with us. And I said, well, if I can catch a plane down to Phu Cat and see what it looks like, maybe I can do it. Well, I found out that the plane rides back and forth from Hanoi to Phu Cat were not that reliable. They may drop you off there, but not so sure they're going to come pick you up again, or there's another scheduled flight. Yeah. So to make a long story short, I didn't go. Did you think that you would like to go back to Phu Cat and take a look around now, or even in '96? Did you want to look around at Phu Cat?
I did. I wanted to, and the reason that I didn't, I just didn't have time. I have a friend, had a friend, he's now deceased, named John Derrick, who was a POW. He was a Marine captured at Way during TET 68. John spent 3 years in Hanoi at the Hanoi Hilton and some of the outlying POW camps. When I was going, I told John that I was going, and he said, "Well, are y'all going to Way Phu Bai?" And I said, "Yeah, it's on our list." I knew it was on our list. He said, "Well, when you go to Way, I'm going to give you a street and a location and tell you as best I can how you can get there. And I want you to go back, if you would, and take a picture of the area or even the houses. I just want to see, if you would, go back." So I took that side trip instead of going to Phu Cat, which turned out to be, both of them would have been great. But I did go to Way, and I found the street where in the village, in the neighborhood along the Perfume River, right at the Citadel, where the bridge crosses the Perfume River and goes to the Citadel, where the NVA and the VC hold up, and the Marines and Army fought them tooth and toenail during TET 68. And I found the neighborhood, and I took a photograph of it. And then I have a Catholic friend who is a priest. He's now retired, but he was a priest in Da Nang, and he asked me the same thing. "Sam, go to Da Nang, go to a certain street and building," and that's where I lived. That was the dormitory for the other priest and I. And I did that and took a picture. He actually escaped Vietnam in 75 by walking cross country to Cambodia and across Cambodia to Thailand, and got out, and then finally got to the United States. So I did those two things, and I thought, well, that's a good substitute for it. But I was able to come back and show John the pictures. And I went to the Wallow prison, to Hanoi Hilton. I have a photograph standing at the door. It's hard not to be emotional when I look at that picture, knowing that my friend John was there, treated very harshly. John literally drinking. Well, he had an issue with alcohol as a result of all of that. And I felt like that maybe I provided some healing for him with my experience there. So I didn't get to go back to Phu Cat.
Well, based on the satellite photos on Google Earth, the only thing you would probably remember seeing there is the revetments and the flight line. They've torn down everything else, so you wouldn't even see where your barracks were or where the mess hall was or any of that stuff.
Right. And Da Nang was the same way. I had been to Da Nang, and the only thing I recognized there were the revetments when I went back in 96. The revetments, of course, are solid and are going to be there. But that was the only thing that I did go back to China Beach at Da Nang. And I tried to find about the location where it was that I found a place to sleep out on the beach at the Marine compound. I think I did, but at any rate, I did go back there and to Marble Mountain.
Well, Sam Creed, this has been a very interesting time speaking with you about your stay. We call it a stay, but it was your tour. You were stationed at Phu Cat, 1968, 1969, the same time I was there. I'm surprised. We probably ran into each other. You probably got on my bus one time. Who knows, right?
I wouldn't be surprised.
And you may, I don't know, if you, back in the day, I was on the radio there called Saigon Steve from midnight to 2. So if you tuned into the base radio station, you may remember my gig there after my real job there.
I did, and I also listened to a station from the Wolfhounds somewhere off to the south of us. I'm not even sure. It may have been a pirate station. I don't know. But I do remember the station. And by the way, my brother did get reassigned to Korea after we got there and we got the paperwork finished. That was, for me, that was successful. I did what I needed to do, and I served my country, and I would do it all again.
They have a saying, they don't make Sam Creeds anymore. You sound like just a fantastic person to do this for your brother and for your country.
Yeah.
And Sam Creed, we thank you for your service.
Well, thank you very much. This has been good. This needed to be done, and it's really been good. I appreciate the work that you've put into this.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Phu Cat Stories. If you'd like to participate in a future Phu Cat Stories podcast, email your contact information to phukatstories@gmail.com. That's phukatstories@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Phu Cat Stories podcast. I'm Saigon Steve.